everybody to our presentation, Live Boldly, Mess Up Often. We're going to be teaching some RODBT skills for those over-controlled clients of ours, or maybe even ourselves. Before we get fully into it, this is our accuracy, utility, and risk statement. This will be included in the slides, so I'm not going to read over it. And then program notices. We don't have any conflicts of interest or commercial support. And then new APA requirements that we disclose any AI. So we used it a little bit for the development of the presentation title and some of the pictures, but that's it. Thanks, AI. All right, so our agenda. So we're going to do some brief introductions. Then I will be doing an overview of RODBT and overcontrol, understanding that a little bit more deeply. Some people in the presentation know RO well, and so this will be a review, and this is your first experience with it. So I want to make sure there's some understanding of what the treatment is, what we're trying to treat, and then we'll get into the way cooler part, which is the skills teaching. And so we'll each be teaching a skill, how to activate social safety in yourself and your clients, how to really understand over-controlled coping and how it becomes a habit, and then self-inquiry. And we'll do a Q&A at the end. So who we are. In true RO fashion, I want to recognize that we're a lot more than psychologists. We're actually really close friends. We hang out at work. We hang out outside of work. This is us on our soccer team that we've been on for the last couple of years. So we're quite a little tribe, and that's a word that we use a lot in RO. And at the end of the day, we're really focused on our connections and our community, and that's what we're trying to teach our clients. But a little bit about us professionally, and I'll start and then hand it over to Carl and Kaylee. I'm a psychologist at UCEBT. I am level 3 trained in RODBT, so I'm official RO practitioner. And I serve on our anxiety and mood team and our traditional DBT team. And I started our RO program at the center. So we have individual to fidelity RO DBT sessions. We have a group that's Tuesdays from 5 to 6:45 in person. We do phone coaching along with that as needed. And we have our consultation team. So that's me.
I'll go next. So I am Kaylee Gross. I'm also at UCBT. I've been there for close to 4 years now, and I'm level 2 trained in RODBT. I'm also on our anxiety and mood team and assessment and testing and DBT team. I'm also our child and adolescent consultation coordinator center. So handling a lot of our youth clients and needs surrounding them. All right, Carl.
I'm Carl Salee, psychologist here. I primarily work on the anxiety and mood team and also the standard DBT team, and I'm also level 2 trained. And yeah, I like working here with Kaylee and Katie, Jen, and I don't know what else to say. I like soccer. It's fun too. That's my favorite part.
Definitely. Both of them are mean soccer players, so. All right. So getting into what is radically open dialectical behavioral therapy. So I first want all of you guys to just think about, when was the last time you had a patient come into your office with just depression? Like, not any anxiety symptoms, not ADHD, not an eating disorder, also not autism, not OCD, just depression. And I'm guessing that even if you can think of a client recently, there's probably not that many on your caseload. And this is kind of the idea behind why our field has been moving to more of a transdiagnostic model of therapy, because a lot of us are recognizing people are coming in with a lot of comorbidity and treating it from like a diagnosis specific treatment doesn't seem to be the most effective, right? Like some people their symptoms are improving, but a lot are not. And I think another thing with RODBT and that our center has noticed is that a large portion of our community also presents with personality disorders that a lot of us aren't as good at treating or diagnosing. So RODBT came in as an evidence-based behavioral treatment for individuals who, under their lots of different diagnoses, have a overcontrolled personality style and coping mechanism. So they engage with their emotions. They engage with their emotions by engaging excessive self-control. This therapy model is informed by 30 plus years of translational treatment development research. It's considered an empirically supported treatment by Division 12 of the APA. And this is our fearless leader, Thomas Lynch, who has developed it. So the problem of overcontrol, what is this coping mechanism or personality style that underlies potentially so many of the diagnoses we see? So previously, existing research had tended to see self-control as a very linear construct. Really, the more self-control you have, the better. Lots of us remember the Stanford marshmallow experiment where these little kids were left in a room with one marshmallow, and if they could wait for about 15 minutes while the adult was out of the room, then they would get 2 marshmallows. And there's a lot of conclusions made from that study that the kids who could wait and get 2 marshmallows were much more successful in life. Potentially, this was part of really doing well at achieving a meaningful life. And I remember reading that study, and I was like, okay, if I can just delay gratification, I'll be happy. And so now what we're seeing in the research is a little bit more of an understanding that maybe you can have too much of a good thing. Maybe you can exert too much control in your life. And that for true psychological health, it's more of this bell curve where you definitely need self-control. So when you're under controlled, you're going to struggle with a lot of different issues in your life. But also, if you engage it too much, yeah, it's also going to show up as some pretty pervasive problems in your life. So the majority of us are in that optimal control range. We can exert control when we need to, let it up when we want to have fun or connect. So this is that problem of over control. And so additionally, this theory has been developing that there are these 2 overarching personality types that tend to fuel a lot of the diagnoses and why there's a lot of comorbidity. And what we've seen, there have been really multiple large-scale studies that are separate, funded differently by different institutions, that have found that under these comorbidities are the presence of these 2 overarching personality styles. And one, which I mentioned before, is undercontrolled. So these are clients that you have who you would describe as more impulsive. They tend to be like dramatic. They're really emotionally expressive, like what they're feeling, you can see. And they are considered more likely to develop externalizing disorders. So this is like borderline personality disorder, narcissism, histrionic, binge purge eating disorders, conduct disorders, bipolar. And then this other personality type, which we're going to be focused on, how do you effectively approach it and treat it, is overcontrolled. These are clients who present as more emotionally constricted. We can't really tell what they're feeling. They can't really tell a lot of the time what they're feeling. They can be described as shy. They tend to be risk averse, except for like controlled high risk potentially. And they're more likely to develop internalizing disorders. So they hold everything in. Okay, so this is like obsessive compulsive personality disorder. We see a lot of avoidant personality disorder we're treating in RO, anorexia nervosa, chronic depression or treatment resistant anxiety, OCD, and autism spectrum. So before we get into some of our favorite skills to treat it, I think it's helpful to understand the theory behind overcontrol. How do we think it develops? So first, and very importantly, and Carl's going to go more into this piece, there is really considered to be a biological component to overcontrol that just out of just like all eye colors are different, brains are different, and that individuals who are overcontrolled tend to have some consistent biological differences. They show up as less sensitive to rewards in their environment. They are much more sensitive to threat. That's just what they tend to see more often than not. They have a high ability to tolerate distress and inhibit their impulses. And their mind tends to focus a lot on details, and their mind can get really caught in the details and struggle to pull back and see the big picture. So you think about sessions that you're in with clients that they get so caught in the weeds, and you're like, wait, like, what is the big picture here? What are we really trying to work on? So then I want you to think about that same person whose brain has these differences. Then they're growing up in a social environment that's really reinforcing control in some way. Often this is an environment, sometimes this can be a family environment, an intense sports team environment, a spiritual environment, a school environment that really reinforces for this individual that mistakes are intolerable, never appear vulnerable, structure and control are really essential to having a meaningful life, and that like winning in some way is an imperative. So for instance, like for me, I grew up in Silicon Valley in California. It was like a super high performing culture that really reinforced like lock in, create a company before the time you're 25, like structure and control are really important. But I've also seen with my clients that sometimes the environment that really reinforces control is actually a really chaotic environment. So, for instance, you have parents who, for one reason or another, maybe they have substance use issues, maybe other mental health issues, maybe they just tend to be kind of disorganized. Maybe there's a lot of kids that there was just chaos. And so, some of my clients like experience that environment as really, really overwhelming, as so threatening. And so it really reinforced like, I do not want to be like that. So there are different environments, but somehow the environment is kind of reinforcing these ideas. So you have this biological temperament, this social environment that reinforces, and then, what do these individuals do as a result, which is how do they cope? And so our clients tend to cope by masking their inner feelings, so that they're never like vulnerable or they never appear out of control. They tend to avoid risk, so that they, never lose. They tend to dislike being the center of attention, so they have just this more aloof and distant style of relating as like a protective mechanism. Yeah. This is how our theory of how overcontrol develops. And then from this development, what we see and conceptualize is that there tends to be 4 core deficits that emerge when you've exerted a really overcontrolled personality or coping style that we are working to treat. And when we introduce each new skill, I will be indicating which deficit this skill really focuses on addressing. So the first core deficit of overcontrol is a lack of receptivity and openness. So our clients that are a good fit for RODBT, they tend to really avoid any disconfirming feedback. They find it really threatening, and they tend to avoid new situations. So when you shift up their schedule, that's really threatening for them. So we have a lot of skills to address this kind of tendency for them to be threat sensitive and closed off. The next core deficit is a lack of flexible responding. So really, as a result of being super closed, they have really rigid ways of responding to the world. And so this really compulsive need for structure, rigid response style, a lot of black and white thinking. This is how one should show up in the world. This is how one shouldn't show up in the world. And it's difficult for them to flex out of that to meet the needs of the environment. They also struggle with emotional expression and awareness. So a lot of these clients are like, I don't know what I feel, or I don't feel a lot at all, or emotions are useless, like, and I don't really like feel them, so I don't understand what the big deal is. And so a lot of the times they're inhibiting their expression, they're very stoic, or they have kind of disingenuous expression. I honestly see this a lot in the adolescents that I work with, of smiling and laughing about things that are really painful, that they're really struggling with, as a way to kind of control the shame or anxiety that they're experiencing. And then the last core deficit is a lack of social connectedness and intimacy. So they really struggle to connect, open up, be vulnerable with what's really going on with them. And all of these deficits lead at the core to a really intense emotional loneliness. So these clients come in, and a lot of them don't have a lot of people in their life. And some of them have a lot of people in their life, but feel like a fraud, that nobody really knows them, that they show up perfectly to fit in. And at the end of the day, if anybody really knew who they were, they would be totally rejected. And so are still like really lonely. Some treatment components to RO-DBT treatment, for those who don't know. It's similar to traditional DBT. So we treat with individual sessions weekly, a group skills class weekly, that's an hour and 45 minutes at our center, optional phone coaching. So whereas traditional DBT, phone coaching is done with every client in stage 1, with RO, it's optional. And then consultation team. There are these 4 components. And in terms of the evidence base for RODBT, because it's transdiagnostic in nature, there's a lot of diversity in ways that it has been researched. So it's been researched on lots of different populations, lots of different diagnoses like depression and anorexia, autism, just on kind of this looking for an overcontrolled style despite any diagnoses. It's been looked at in older adults, adults, adolescents, children. They've looked at like the skills portion as a standalone. All these are showing really great evidence this is an effective treatment, and really getting at this emotional loneliness and connectedness and flexibility pieces. It's been done in lots of different countries now. And here's one of them on children, mechanisms of change, implementation study. And I think a really important piece of RODBT that I love is that it's focused on social connectedness, but it's always focused on these behaviors within the context of the environment that the client is in. So in that sense, it becomes really tailored, and I think it addresses diversity in presentations and cultures and race more effectively. And there's been some good blogs and articles on that I can share later. I'm going to hand it over to Carl.
Yeah. Struggling with the mute button. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so I'll be teaching y'all the first skill today, and this is a core skill in RODBT that's usually paired with the vast majority of all of the other skills that are taught in the class. It's one of those skills that's like, do this and then the skill. And the reason that it's paired with most other skills is that it's the primary skill that helps with the biological component of regulating individuals who have that heightened threat sensitivity that Katie explained earlier. So, if you recall just a few slides before about this biosocial theory, um, overcontrolled clients have a biological predisposition for their nervous system's threat response to be more sensitive to cues in the environment than folks who have a more um, flexible control style of coping. And so, as you can see here on this slide, the skill of activating social safety is central to helping overcome all of the core deficits explained earlier. So it's if you think about it, when our threat mode, like our nervous system, biological threat mode, has taken over our body, it's very hard to be open and receptive to feedback. Tend to be a lot more defensive or closed off. Um, Also, there's a very limited repertoire of behaviors that we feel we can engage with when our threat system is driving everything. So we need to be in our social safety system to be more flexible in our response styles. Also, our emotional expressions tends to get pretty flat or limited when we're in threat mode. And as you could imagine, if we're in that mode all the time, it's also pretty difficult to build close, intimate relationships with people. So the skill is involved in everything. So we thought if we could only pick a few skills to teach you all today, we can't do the entire book. We figured this would be one of the most important ones. So you can go to the next slide, Katie. So before we go into the actual skill, it's pretty important to have some psychoeducation about why and how this skill works so well. Because when we get to the teaching of the actual skill a little bit later, you'll see it's kind of just a simple set of like moving your body in a particular way. And a lot of overcontrolled clients with perfectionistic tendencies and really rigid kind of response to teaching or feedback will have a really hard time buying into this skill without the good rationale behind it. Um, I can say from experience, I've tried teaching the skill without the rationale and with the rationale, and I usually get major eye rolls if I don't give this like nervous system psychoeducation first. So a few things to note about biotemperamental predisposition is that it impacts our automatic and pre-conscious reactions to stimuli from our environment. So, as you might imagine, someone with a higher biotemperamental predisposition towards over-controlled reactions, that person is going to be responding automatically to things in their environment uh, with a sense of threat activation much more than someone who has less of these traits. And this is because their body frequently reacts with a threat response to things that might otherwise just be neutral in reality, or sometimes even positive. And it creates this like feedback loop of reinforcing cognitive biases about what is safe and what is not safe. So think somebody says, okay, if this is how I'm feeling all of the time, or the vast majority of the time, that sort of reinforces a generalized over-controlled belief that like nowhere is safe, the world is not safe. And that type of cognitive bias tends to then reinforce reinforce like behaviors that are done to try to avoid it. And that's, as you can see, this is a really, really difficult habitual reinforcement cycle to break. And that's what RODBT is so effective at compared to some other treatments is um, explicitly targeting this like over-controlled cycle and trying to logic out of rigid thinking is like a paradox that doesn't work for a lot of these clients because of this biotemperamental like predisposition or bias um, that they have. And so on the outside, how they appear pretty much anywhere they go. So this could be at work, at home, the gym, at a party. They'll oftentimes appear a bit more uptight or rigid or aloof or like Katie said earlier, too overly phony with their expressions if they're trying to hide what they're actually feeling. So, yeah, next slide. I got to start my little timer here. Just trying to make sure I'm sticking to time. Okay, so because traditional cognitive interventions that are aimed at breaking down the more irrational thinking patterns that folks with mental health disorders have, because this traditional method tends to be kind of ineffective for overcontrolled clients at the get-go, like at the beginning of therapy, um, because their biases are already so rigid and reinforced by their biotemperamental reactions. Uh, an overcontrolled client must be able to know how to calm their nervous system down with a bottom up skill in order to access some of the other skills that require a bit more flexibility in thinking or risk taking. There's a lot of risk taking in RODBT, um, but a client isn't going to do that um, if they don't know how to first change their biology a little bit or impact their biology, I should say. So, in a lot of ways, this activating social safety can be thought of as similar to the tip skill in standard DBT, if more of you are familiar with that one, because they're both bottom up skills that are almost like precursors to accessing the more complex, like cognitive behavioral skills that are involved. So, um, another way of putting it is that activating social safety doesn't require a ton of prefrontal cortex activity to do it. And it just relies on physical behaviors that alter our inner states. And I'll oftentimes repeat a phrase with some of my overthinking, compulsive, perfectionistic, overplanning uh, clients who aren't willing to try new skills because of that compulsive overthinking. I'll say to them, well, it's oftentimes impossible to think your way into new behavior. If you could, you would have already done it. But you can behave your way into a new style of thinking, and that's the approach that we try to take with this. Um, and then one of the other great things about this skill is that it not only calms down our own nervous system, bringing us from a place of threat into safety, but it's bi-directional in the sense that the skill involves certain nonverbal behaviors that signal to other people who are observing us a sense of social safety. And this happens through our mirror neurons, a word that I struggle to say. And when we're observing this behavior, we oftentimes engage in like micro mimicking of what we're observing, of those nonverbals. And when people do that, it sends the signal into their nervous system as well. So this is like a 2-for-1 skill for a lot of people. It calms us down, and it tends to help the people around us be more in a state of like openness and curiosity and an engagement with social settings. And so earlier I was talking about how difficult it is to break the feedback loop of reinforcing cognitive biases that a lot of OC clients have. This skill is pretty fundamental to like get that wedge in there and start to break down those feedback loops because it can create a feedback loop going the opposite direction when we engage it. So the one more thing about that just before is that we're actively as the RO therapists supposed to be modeling this behavior in session with our clients to help create that sense of safety. So, all right, next slide. So As I told you before, there's a lot of preamble to this skill just because it works best when clients know why it works and how it works. So there's a lesson that we go through in the skills class that's just before teaching the activation of social safety, and it's about neuroception. And this is a bit more psychoeducational, so I'll kind of breeze through it, but it's very integral for setting the stage and teaching the skill. So the basics to know about, pardon me, neuroception is that we as humans are constantly receiving data about the world through our sensory organs, and our brain is nonstop, continually at a subconscious or preconscious level, scanning and interpreting that incoming sensory data before we're even aware that it's doing so. And our nervous system tends to have different substrates or modes that it is in depending on various contextual factors. So when I'm describing these substrates to clients, I like to use the metaphor of, how in a lot of new cars these days, there's like a knob or a switch you can turn, and it changes the car between eco mode to sport mode to EV mode to hybrid mode, like depending on which mode the car is in. The car's computer has like pre-made settings that are designed to operate the vehicle according to that set of parameters. And our brain does the same thing. And instead of a knob that turns it and tells it what mode to be in, it's like the external stimuli that we're perceiving in the environment. Or sometimes I would add internal stimuli from things like memories can kind of activate the threat system too. And so all of the substrates are listed on the slide here. So if we look top left, we have this cute little doodle looking puppy is in a sense of social safety. So the dog's belly is exposed. It's got like a nice closed mouth smile. It looks relaxed and curious and ready to be kind of playful and engaged. And then we might enter into the novelty substrate when like something happens in our environment, catches our attention. Say, okay, hmm, that's new, that's unexpected. We haven't quite determined or appraised if it's good or bad yet, so we're just sort of like this dog in the top right corner. And then our nervous system or our brain might appraise that as being a threatening stimuli so that it'll switch us into the threat mode where we might be a little bit more reserved. We might be hiding a little more like less expressive. I did not find a stock image of like a menacing, like grimacing dog, but we can also be a bit more like aggressive or hostile too if we're in threat mode. And then this cute little bottom right dog represents reward. So something to know about threat and reward is that they are both excitatory settings. The excitatory valence of threat is like this is bad. The excitatory valence of reward is this is great. That's very very reductionistic. I'm aware, but it's kind of just a helpful way to think about it. And then we can also go into overwhelm with too much excitement on either direction. So fainting if we're in a extreme distressing environment, or like think of the young women in the front row of like a Beatles concert or Michael Jackson, and they're like there's videos of them like fainting from overwhelm reward. Um, so um, we're going to focus mostly on safety or threat for most OC clients, and they tend to be most often in the threat substrate uh, due to the biosocial factors we described earlier. Um, and we oftentimes send nonverbal signals that don't allow others to know what we're thinking or feeling when we're in this substrate. I think it's kind of a social defensive strategy to hold our cards close to our chest, so to speak, keep our expressions hidden. And what you'll see is two stereotypical types of ways that overcontrol clients will behave. when they're in threat mode. One is the overly agreeable, very avoidant, disingenuous, kind of people-pleasing um, mode, or on the other side, there's like the disagreeable, aggressive, kind of controlling type behavior. These are the two main types associated with maladaptive overcontrol. So, as you might imagine, when you're in this mode all the time, it's extremely difficult to form and keep close relationships, to be open and receptive to feedback, to be flexible in how we respond to situations, and to be authentic in our expressions. So, however, with practice, it is possible to turn on our social safety substrate and feel more open, curious, relaxed, and connected with others. So, next slide. Um, so the main system in our body that acts as the switch between substrates that we focus on in RO is the ventrovagal complex, and this is part of our parasympathetic nervous system. So think the calm down, rest, and digest system. And this has connections to muscles and organs all over our body. That kind of innervates most of our body. And we know that certain body postures or muscle movements or other behaviors can act as an automatic cue to activate this ventrovagal complex. Um, if you think about it, these body postures or movements or behaviors are typically things that we only do when there are not threats immediately present. Think about the dog in the top left from the previous slide had its soft underbelly exposed. When dogs are feeling threatened, when mammals are feeling threatened, they don't show the more vulnerable parts of their bodies to their perceived enemies. And it's nice to know that our nervous system does this because when we are in threat mode, our prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking, values based executive control area of our brain, is not always really working the most smoothly. And that's because it takes a lot of energy to use that part of our brain, and it's also like slower. And so if our body perceives that we are in a threat, or reacting to a threat, it kind of tries to speed up the reactions and use a little bit less energy. And so this kind of ties back to we can't always really think our way into new behavior. We can't always think ourselves out of feeling threatened, but always maintain control over our body movements. And I'm about to teach four of those movements that, when done with commitment, can reliably bring someone out of threat mode and into safety mode. And before we go to the next slide, just real quick, um, these are just four movements out of many. There are so many things that we can do to help calm down our nervous system, and tons of those can be found in the skills manual. Um, and I would even argue too, like a lot of those movements aren't really specifically like um, RO specific, but the ones that we're going to focus on, we tend to emphasize the most out of all of them because of their more like social nature. When done in the presence of other people, it has that 2-for-1 benefit that I described earlier of calming our own nervous system down and helping other people feel safe around us. So kind of got that double usefulness. So, all right, go to the next skill. Um, yeah, so thanks everyone for bearing with me with that really in-depth psychoeducation before we get to this fairly simple skill. But just keep in mind, it's important. If you don't want to be met with tons of resistance and eye rolls from your overcontrolled clients, don't skip the psychoed. That's what I say. Um, it's kind of wrapped up in part of why this skill works. All right, so um, this is called the Big Three plus one, and just right out the get-go, plus one, what does that mean? That's because one of the body movements we can really only do while we're seated. So if we try to do it while we're standing up, we might fall over and get a concussion or something. So nobody wants that. And these four movements are all known to activate the BVC. And they're things we, just as a reminder, we tend to automatically do when we're already feeling safe and curious in social settings. So for those of you listening in right now, I invite you to imagine yourself, like how you're feeling, how you're acting when you're sitting, let's say around a cozy campfire or in the living room after a nice dinner with like all of your closest friends and your closest family members, and you're just relaxed and you're locked in, and it's like a great social vibe for you. Just think about like how you're behaving. Oftentimes we're more open, we have more relaxed postures, our faces are expressive and reactive to the people around us, more instinctively versus us having to think about it. I don't know about y'all, but I sometimes have some social anxiety. And like when I get in my threat mode and I'm like around other people, I'm like trying to think about how I'm supposed to move my face. And it just like, it's a spiral. So we want to try to help clients get into that nervous system mode where they're not having to overthink these things. Um, so there are four main muscle groups that we're going to focus on before we practice together that the VVC has connections to. So that would be our diaphragm. So that's the muscle that controls our lungs. It changes the pressure in our lungs. It kind of goes down and up. And then so there's nerves in the diaphragm. There's nerves in the facial muscles that control our lips and our mouth. Um, there are VVC nerves in the facial muscles that control our eyebrows and that control the muscles on the outside of our eye sockets. So if you see lovely old Thomas Lynch here, he's got some nice like crow's feet on the side of his eyes. It's those like the thing you look for when you see like a genuine smile versus a fake smile. Um, the muscle that controls those can activate the VVC. So do a little bit of experiential learning here for everybody. Don't worry, nobody here is going to be asked to like say anything out loud. This is sort of just a at home, at wherever you are sitting at your computer, to try to follow along. And I'm going to lead us in this skill real quick. But before I do, I invite you all to bring to mind something like a social situation that you have been in where you felt embarrassed or ashamed or anxious or pissed off, or maybe a social situation that you're anticipating that you feel really anxious about, or threatened by. I want y'all to actually invite in just a little bit of those uncomfortable feelings. Just kind of imagine it and maybe notice if your heart rate goes up a little bit, or if you're just feeling a little bit more tense, a little bit like less engaged. So give y'all just like a moment to invite that feeling in. And then if you're sitting down in a chair, I imagine most of us are watching this CE presentation, I invite you to lean back in your chair, maybe kind of like open up your arms a little bit, uh, like this. Just sort of lean back in a bit more of a relaxed posture. And kind of look around a little bit, and then um, think about taking a nice deep breath, engaging your diaphragm. It's the belly breathing that a lot of therapists are taught during grad school. You may need to teach this a little bit more to some clients who don't know what diaphragm breathing is. It's shoulders relaxed, belly expands. Nice deep diaphragm breath, and we're leaning back. And then the next one is a little bit more challenging, especially for overcontrolled clients who don't have genuine smiles on their face very often, due to maybe chronic depression or some of those personality disorders that Katie mentioned earlier. But we're specifically doing a soft, closed mouth smile because the only time our teeth are showing during a smile is actually when we're in more of that excitatory mode with like, we just won the championship of the Beehive beer league soccer team, which, hell yeah. Or we might be doing it when we're like threatened, and think of like a grimace or a snarl or something. Um, so we actually want clients to keep their mouth closed, and it's just a nice, like, gentle lifting of the corners, and also a little squint of the eyes, kind of. We want to activate those facial muscles on the corner of our eyes here. So, everybody with me, lean back, close mouth, smile, deep breath. And then this last one, the eyebrow wag, the fabled eyebrow wag. Um, Katie and Kaylee are kind of chuckling, and if you've done RO before, you might chuckle too, because this is the one you get the most WTFs about. What's an eyebrow wag? Um, our eyebrows are one of the most expressive parts of our face. We usually show this clip of like a comedian who does a bit where he like says different things and has his eyebrows moving in different ways, and it's super hilarious. But if you really think about it, like, without our eyebrows, it would be so hard to know what people are expressing. And over-controlled clients tend to either be stuck in a permaglare, or you may have heard, some unsanitary descriptions, the RBF, et cetera, resting blank face. Um, we call it just flat face, to be more politically correct. Um, and the idea with the eyebrow wag is not like an extended, like, that's creepy. It's just a quick little up and down while we're doing the closed mouth smile, the deep breaths, and the leaning back. So, everybody, let's try all of them together one last time. We're gonna lean back, deep breath, little eyebrow wag, closed mouth smile. And that's the skill. That is the big 3+1. And I think I have, yeah, just enough time. I'm going to share one last thing that is common for OC clients, and then while I'm sharing this, I would just love for folks to post in the chat it, just like what you noticed. How did that feel? Um, if any judgments showed up, because I would say without fail, in an RO class, at least one person after doing this is going to raise their hand and be like, "That was dumb. Like, why did we do that?" Um, uh, and it's good to like elicit these judgments and encourage clients to have an open mind to like really commit to trying this, because it feels kind of unnatural for a lot of people at first, because they're used to never changing their face, and they're oftentimes hunched over. Or I had a client who for the first 3 weeks in therapy would sit on the very edge of his seat, sat like this while he was talking to me, and it was very unnerving. I had to kind of coach him to like, okay, yeah, like lean back, and I modeled it for him. And now this client is about to graduate, and he's like one of the chillest dudes I know. So, uh, yeah, let's take a peek at what people are noticing in the chat. Nice, makes a lot of sense. Feels relaxing. Valuing the eyebrows more than I did before. Yeah, so I wish I had time to show the clip of the comedian, but YouTube copyright stuff, it was easier to leave it out. But
But
that
it's
was very
called Talking
focused.
Eyebrows, I'm pretty sure. The YouTube clip.
Yeah, it's really funny. Nice, Rada. I felt surprised that I felt an increased sense of confidence, but also felt skeptical that I looked more confident. Rada, I'm glad you said that. Like, that is such a common response that people give, is like, I I feel better doing this, but I also imagine myself looking like silly or weird or fake. And when people really commit, oftentimes an over-controlled client will say, I think that I might look weird, but as the therapist observing them, it looks natural. It looks like that person is relaxed. Yep, very similar to the tip willing hands half smile skill from traditional DBT. Yep.
And Carl, to be fair, when we teach some of our RO clients the skill for the first time, especially the eyebrows, they do look weird. Like
Yeah.
this is like their first time moving their eyebrows in a long time. So if you think about like picking up any new behavior again, you're like, this feels clunky. And sometimes it's like they're like this, and it's like it is weird. It's weird signaling. So it's just like embracing the learning and practicing process that like totally it is kind of weird. You are kind of doing it a little bit awkwardly. Like, let's practice. Like we're gonna get to a better spot with it.
So yeah, thanks everybody for participating in this with me. Per what Katie said, the last thing that I had on my notes before I pass to Kaylee is yeah, just do your best as a therapist to roll with resistance because you will be met with resistance. Try to roll with it and still encourage like trying new things and practicing this and like not giving up. Lean into the strengths that an OC client has, which is like perseverance and determination, and kind of encourage that. Like if I know that if you're just determined enough and practice this enough, you'll start to feel it. It'll feel nice. And so far that method has worked quite well for all the RO clients that I have. And it eventually starts to feel more natural. That's the big 3+1, y'all. And now I'm gonna pass it off to Kaylee for the next part.
Awesome. Thank you, Carl. So, another skill that's really important to talk about in RO, especially when we're first learning it, is talking about overcontrol as a habit and really understanding our own overcontrol or the client's overcontrol. And so it hits on like one of the main areas of deficits that it hits on is lack of flexible responding because it becomes just almost like a way of doing, a way of being that we don't even think about it. And so then we're responding the same way over and over again, regardless of the context. And that can be pretty problematic. And then I think this is another skill too that allows us to access hitting on all the other areas of over control as well. But another one that I was thinking of particularly was receptivity and openness. So when we're stuck in this idea of like responding in the same way and habitually responding, we're not really open to doing something different or receiving different information. We're just kind of stuck in the same loop over and over again. So on the next slide, you can see a chart. Sorry, I got ahead of myself, but this idea of over control, just the reminder of that self control is this idea that it's this ability to inhibit our emotional urges, impulses, and behaviors in order to pursue these long term goals that we have. And it's highly valued. But just like Katie said, kind of too much of anything, like good thing, actually is not great. So going back to that bell curve, if we go too far on one end of the spectrum, it's not helpful. It can actually create a lot of problems for us. But then it often leads to this question for us of, okay, well, if it's problematic, then why are we still doing it? Like, why is that still a thing for them? Well, that is because sometimes it actually gets reinforced. So sometimes pretending that you're okay in a situation can prevent a conflict. Sometimes working those long hours can result in getting that job promotion that you were looking for. Maybe planning ahead does prevent a future problem. So that's coming up for us just in life. Like in our house, like we're talking about getting a survey for our fence. And we're thinking like fence lines, we're going to redo our fence. So we're weighing out this idea of like, well, it probably won't be a problem, but should we plan ahead and spend all this money on this? So that's a way where maybe that could be reinforced in the future, that like over control, over planning, thinking about the boundary, like our boundary line, and getting it surveyed for our house. Following a rule can actually make our life easier. And so again, sometimes it's reinforced. And a fun fact is that occasional rewards actually make habits even harder for us to break. And perhaps somewhat counterintuitively, that intermittent reinforcement or occasional reward makes it harder for us to break. So if we think about those slot machines in Vegas, they don't always pay us. It'd be great if they did, but it only occasionally reinforces us. And despite this, we keep feeding money into it. So, like, why? Why do we do that? Well, that's because our brain knows that reward is available, just not when it will arrive or how much effort, meaning money, are we going to have to put into this before we obtain that golden jackpot of a reward. So thus, when playing those slots in Las Vegas, when we're not immediately rewarded, we keep going. Versus a different kind of machine, like a vending machine or soda machine, if we put money into it and we don't get our snack or our soda coming out, we usually tend to shake the machine or kick it because our brain has learned that immediately we're supposed to get a reward for this from the soda machine or the vending machine every time. So that intermittent reinforcement, that occasional reinforcement, is what keeps us so stuck in habits like gambling, or it makes it so addictive for us, or even more difficult for us to break. So now we're going to go into looking at the flowchart that RO uses to start helping us understand these habits that we have developed and how this has even become a habit, what keeps it going. And so we'll refer back to this at the end as well, and I'll use this at the end to go through an example. But for now, I'm going to go through piece by piece, like each part of it to really explain like what each one means. So for the first one, cues, we are looking at what is triggering our overcontrolled. And so Katie, you can go to the next slide. And overcontrolled in general tends to be triggered by when our environment is perceived as disconfirming in some way, unexpected, novel, or discrepant. Some common other cues that you'll see that come from these main categories are being in a situation that's new, being asked to perform, like giving a CE presentation, making a mistake, feeling vulnerable or exposed. So giving a CE presentation hits on a lot of those for me, like I'm performing in front of a bunch of people. It's being recorded for people to see later. So I'm feeling a little bit exposed. And then if I make a mistake or stumble over my words, it's more likely that it's going to trigger an overcontrol habit for me. So I want you all to kind of think about either for yourself or like some clients that you currently have, what are some of these typical cues that tend to trigger your own over-controlled coping or closed-minded responses? And just have you reflect on it. Okay, so after we identified what cued this, we're going to go into the next step. And the next step is describing those inner experiences that are linked to the over-controlled coping. So those inner experiences are our thoughts, emotions, sensations, memories, and images. And Katie, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And then those can be like when they come up, they tend to be pretty like unwanted things that just like make us feel uncomfortable, put us into that threat system that Carl was talking about, or even that overwhelm system sometimes. And so some of those things could be like just those sensations of like a stiff neck, a headache, maybe like feeling like this like tenseness in our body. Can also be these thoughts of they don't appreciate my self-sacrifices, or you have to follow these rules, or maybe a thought of there's only one way to stack the dishwasher. Can be also feelings of feeling embarrassed, feeling numb, feeling annoyed, feeling all of those things can trigger and be linked to our over-controlled coping. So another reason, like just within the skill, like recognizing our habits, another really important reason for recognizing this is going to be an area that we can do a lot of self-inquiry around once we recognize some of these pieces, which Katie is going to be talking about self-inquiry more for us. But think about for you, what are some of these typical private experiences that are going on internally for you or your clients that most often precede that over-controlled coping that might most often show up for you? So then after we identify that, the next part is that we are going to shift into asking ourselves, what was my urge? So looking at what is the action urge that was associated, like related to these unwanted inner experiences that I was having. So did I desire to escape or dominate the stressful situation? And in a lot of these over control clients, we tend to see two common ways of coping. One is more of this excessive approach coping, and the other is avoidance. So, for approach coping, by that, I mean just turning towards the stressor or the problem and trying to fix it, like really turning towards it. But just like self-control, there's too much of a good thing. There's too much of approach coping that happens sometimes. And so it gets us into that excessive approach coping. And that can look like maybe you learned that you gained 3 pounds. And so then you are restricting all of your calories the next 2 days, or you're refusing to eat any sugar or carbs for the next week because you gained those 3 pounds. It could look like not relaxing until you complete everything on your to-do list, or you can't leave to go home for work until you answered all of those emails, even if you received 20 emails at the end of the day. You're staying to finish those and not relaxing until you finish them all. And usually this approach coping tends to be driven by these extreme desires to win, control, or dominate other people in other situations. So this can include things like lying or cheating to win. So in soccer, if the ball went off of the other team, but if I told them the honest answer, the other team would get a corner kick, I might lie to give them less of a chance. Be like, no, 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 it's a goal kick. It's not a corner kick. It went off of you. If it could also look like outwardly agreeing or knowing, like even when you know you disagree or that you're going to sabotage it. Kind of like, yep, of course. And then internally you're like, nope, this is dumb. I don't like this. You are wrong. You're an idiot. Any of those could be what you're thinking, and then maybe you do something to make it so that it's not actually going to work. Can also look like withholding important information to try to control the situation. Like, I'm not going to tell person about this construction that is going on, so they are going to be late to this meeting. So then I can avoid seeing them. So just could be some different ways that it shows up, but that's the idea of this approach coping coming from this desire to dominate the situation, to win, to control other people or what is happening. Now with avoidance coaching, avoidance coping, those are things more where you're just trying to turn away from the problem. You're not trying to think about it. Walking away from it could even look like just abandoning the relationship. Like, nope, we're done. Not even gonna deal with this. It could look like distracting your attention from it, just being on your phone or always watching reality TV, just something so that you're not turning towards the problem and looking at it. So avoidance coping and approach coping, they're not bad. Like they can actually be really helpful and effective. It really just depends on the situation. And the problems arise when we are rigidly using these tools, like when we're rigidly avoiding problems, when we are always approaching problems, regardless of whatever the situation is calling for. So as a reminder, the steps so far that we've gone through are 1, recognizing what cued are the overcontrol or the closed-mindedness, and then 2, recognizing those private experiences that were going on for us that contributed to this action urge in our overcontrol coping. And then step 3 is that recognizing that urge that we had. Now in step 4, what we are doing is recognizing our overcontrolled coping. So there's a lot of different ways that it can look and it can come out. And so I know this is a long, long list, but what I want to do as we go through this list is I want you to think about yourself or clients and just mark the ones that are most typical for you, that maybe come up the most. And so these are helpful ones where you can maybe later go back and really fully go through this skill, recognizing how over-control coping comes out with the client, what cues it, or for yourself as well. So I'm going to read these, and there's just a forewarning, 2 slides of it, and these are all in the RO manual and things that all the over-control coping, like the RODBT clients, get as well. They get to see this list. So some examples of how over-control coping manifests include shutting down, denying the problem, ignoring or pretending not to hear the unwanted feedback. Like if your partner's like, hey, could you do the dishes? And then you're just on the couch acting like, I'm just chilling. Oh, I have my headphones in. I didn't hear that. No. Pretending that everything is okay when it's not. Abandoning a relationship rather than dealing with the conflict. Pouting, sulking, walking away, redoing other people's work. Like if you don't like how something was put in the dishwasher, you take it out and you redo it. Using the silent treatment, going flat-faced, turning the tables by finding fault in other people or asking them a question in return for like their feedback or a question they asked you. So if they're like, hey, can you do the dishes? Oh, well, like, can you do the dishes and this and that? Like you're just kind of deflecting, putting it back on them. Could also look like sabotaging or disparaging other people's efforts or work, smiling when angry, compulsively caretaking others, being obsessed with details, losing the big picture, changing the topic. That's a really fun one too. That happens a lot in conversations like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. I'm just going to shift the topic so we don't have to talk about this right now. Agreeing with someone while inwardly disagreeing, obsessive rehearsal or planning. So that would have been like me practicing this presentation for 4 hours each night this week. Pretending to cooperate while secretly sabotaging, thinking about death or suicide, engaging in self-harm, depriving oneself, punishing oneself, insisting that things are the same, telling others what we have to do or how to behave, insisting that there's only one way to do something or that one's perspective is the correct one. there is only one way to clean the house. It has to be done in this specific order. You have to wipe down the counters first before you vacuum or sweep, because then you're going to get more crumbs on the floor. So kind of telling people those things like this is the order and this is how it's supposed to be. And you can go to the next slide. And so some other examples are criticizing people who are dissimilar to us, showing concern even if we don't feel it, lying to someone to avoid social disapproval or to win. So that could be me lying about, oh, I hate soggy cereal. That is, yeah, please don't reject me because I like soggy cereal. Could look like avoiding the limelight, trying to never give a CE presentation so that you don't have to sit in front of people, desiring appreciation but never asking for it, persevering in a behavior, tolerating distress despite clear evidence that harm may result from it, pervasively attending parties or social events out of obligation or duty, not because you want to, like, oh, my boss invited me to their kids' baseball game, and like, I really hate baseball, but I should go because that is gonna look good for me. It could also look like never asking or really allowing oneself to rest. Again, that I'm answering all the emails before I can relax, or I'm always working late into the night before I can go back to my trashy reality TV show. Downplaying your successes or masking your feelings, blocking any compliments. That's a favorite for me. Oh, no, it was lucky, or no, I didn't do great. Rarely or never giving praise to others, blocking offers to help, planning or engaging in revengeful acts, harshly gossiping, engaging in social comparisons, isolating, saying yes, thinking no, obsessively working to solve the problem, blaming others, having a hyper focus on order, symmetry, over apologizing or never apologizing. So I hope as I was reading these, you were going through and just marking those ones that tend to come up for you. And I hope you recognized some of them, how they might show up. So after we recognize that, the next step is to understand the consequences. Like, okay, what happens by me engaging in this behavior? And so really, like, what we tend to see is like maybe you get some short-term consequence that's pretty positive, that's reinforcing, but overall, the long-term consequences tend to create a lot of problems, especially in relationships. So never turning towards the problem can make it that the problem actually grows. It builds and builds. Of like avoiding the problem too can also, or even just feedback, can keep us from learning something new or finding an even better way to fix a problem. Like maybe if I'm actually open about how to load the dishwasher, I could end up saving myself time. Compulsive controlling or fixing can lead to burnout or exhaustion, which then exacerbates, maybe then we try harder and then we get even more burned out. Or maybe we're always like sacrificing and giving to other people to control how people are thinking about us. But then that can lead to, over time, like bitterness or resentment for them not recognizing our self-sacrifices. So this, in the end, it heavily impacts our relationships. So I want you to think about, just for your own relationships or your clients, the ways that the overcontrol impacts your relationships with others, but then also what keeps it going, because that intermittent reinforcement is what keeps us doing it, even though it creates these long-term consequences. So it could be maybe I get a little bit of relief, or maybe I got that promotion, or maybe I was able to avoid embarrassment for a little bit. And that's what reinforced this and kept it going. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is, again, this is a flow chart, and it's based on the worksheet that is in the skills. And so I'm going to go through an example to kind of pull it all together for us. And so this example is for the cue. I was working and it was like a long day, and I came home and then did the initial pleasantries with my husband. And then the cue was he started talking to me about house projects. And then it was, for me, it was discrepant. It wasn't what I was expecting to happen. And it also wasn't what I was wanting to happen either. So it cued some unwanted or disliked experiences, private experiences for me. So immediately for me, it was like, oh, I'm so tired. I felt even heavier. And like, I don't want to talk about this right now. And then had just really like kind of this immediate urge though to escape, but also these thoughts in general of you should just like listen, like that's a good partner, that's what you do, like you're there for them, you're supportive. And so then that my urge was to escape, but I stayed in it. My overcontrolled coping looked like trying to pretend everything was okay and listening, trying to engage in the conversation, but also just agreeing to try to move it along so I could get out of the conversation sooner rather than later. Like, yeah, okay, cool. And so it got reinforced because I avoided conflict. I didn't put in as much effort as I was thinking. But in reality, the consequence too, like long term, is that it's a missed opportunity for me to like join with my partner, to really do something together with him, to make it more of a home together. And as it went on, it creates this loop. So in this loop, I was doing the over-controlled coping. It was helping me avoid that conflict and feel a little bit safer by not going into it. But then I had even more unwanted private experiences of like, I'm so tired. I don't want to do this anymore. And I started to get even more overwhelmed too. But then I was stuck in this loop over and over again. And then once it's done, it's great because short term in the fact that I avoided conflict. And that was something that I had learned just throughout my like experiences of it's easier just to go along and get along to avoid conflict or to like control their perception of me or like to make it help put less effort in there or be more vulnerable. So just go along to get along in this moment. But then thinking about big picture to the relationship, it can create a lot more conflict in that relationship. It can create a lot more bitterness and resentment, especially if he starts doing something that I don't like, but I'm not saying it. And then it also creates these negative thought loop patterns of like, oh, but then why didn't you say that to him? You should have said it. Now it's too late. So it just keeps me in a loop. But recognizing it, now we can start thinking about it and doing something different. Now, in that moment, I could have, instead of following that urge, I could have listened to it, activated my social safety system, and then used some other skills to help me do something different so that I am not avoidance coping and I'm being flexible to the situation so that I'm doing it to act more on my values and build that relationship, which is important to me. Okay. So that is my example, but I hope you guys take time to really think through this on your own time and think through your own examples, either with your clients or yourself, because sometimes our over-controlled coping too, just thinking about in our own work can get in the way of how we show up for clients, or just like trying something new, learning something new, being flexible when maybe that's what's needed for that case.
And something to add on is that this is a really great lesson to help with treatment targeting. Working through this model, whether it's like in skills class or in an individual session, and going through all these different ways over controlled coping shows up is a really great way to be like, oh, that is like a common one, like I do. And this is how it shows up in front of like the people that I love or the relationships that I want to be closer to. And so then we'll start tracking that week to week and figuring out how to shift it. So this is just like ripe with really great treatment targets.
Um, I also wanted to chime in too because this is related to a question that somebody answered or asked about. I would like to hear more about how you work with clients who are deeply fused with an identity of achievement or perfectionism,
Mm.
where overcontrol has become central to how they see themselves. How do you invite flexibility without it feeling like a threat to who they are? And I typed an answer if y'all want to read that, but I wanted to say it out loud too and see if Haley or Katie, you have anything to add. But I think that actually plays into this lesson in particular, as well as the reason why we do chain analyses in our individual sessions with people. So one of the rule-ins for being a good candidate for RODBT is they have to have at least like one therapy goal that's related to relationships, like close relationships. And so we focus most things in RODBT on how overcontrolled coping can be maladaptive for relationships. And so if somebody is really, really, really fused to achievement and perfectionism as a part of their identity, I would say it's in my experience has been next to impossible to avoid triggering their threat response.
Mhm.
So there are protocols in the treatment manual to help with like alliance ruptures or any sort of like disengagement that that might cause if you as a therapist accidentally do that. And then B, when we do this type of lesson, it kind of helps clients see that in some contexts or circumstances, the over-controlled perfectionistic behavior might be reinforced and have become part of their identity. But like functionally analyzing it in terms of how it impacts their closest relationships oftentimes acts as like an eye opener for clients. They're like, oh wow, I didn't even think of how this was impacting my intimate or social relationships. I don't
Mhm.
know if y'all have anything to add, but that was my answer to the question.
Yeah, go for it, Kaylee.
Yeah, I was thinking also, like, there's so many other great skills, but just building that motivation for them to be more open to learn more by using values too. Thinking about how they really want to show up in their relationships and how this inflexibility can get in the way of that. And then I think, too, it's great that we're going into self inquiry because that is one of the core skills that can actually help increase this flexibility in how they think about themselves and how they view themselves. And then
Mhm.
maybe as we learn more, there's other skills that we will need to build in. However, part of this, as like Carla said, is that you are going to hit on their threat system. And we're trying to encourage them to just to be more open to learn and use that activating social safety system, like those skills to get us in our social safety system so that we can continue to be more open and do something different that is more aligned with how they want to show up in their relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And lastly, I would say, like, at the beginning of treatment, we will touch on this threat sensitivity by reminding them that over control, perfectionism is really, really amazing in a lot of ways. Like, I don't think that me, Carl, or Kaylee would have doctorates without it. So, like, awesome. I don't think we would have gotten to the moon without it. There's so much amazing things that having kind of a more over controlled coping style. Um, can get you and achieve. And so what we're really trying to do in RO is increase flexibility. We're not trying to like take away the coping mechanism. Like you will forever be in some ways like perfectionistic or over controlled, right? There's a biological temperament. But we want you to be able to like turn it off when you are at a party and you just want to hang out and talk, or you want to dance, or whatever is your valued goal. We want to increase your flexibility to be able to achieve it, like Keely said. Also, a great intervention is what I'm going to be talking about next, which is self-inquiry. Um, Carl, was there anything else before I moved along?
Somebody asked for specific books or workbooks recommended, and I was just looking up the main skills manual. But I believe did you put citations for those earlier in the slides?
Not earlier. I don't know if they're
Okay.
at the end, but
Okay, I'll look for those and post them,
cool.
um and then information on good RODBT trainings for therapists. I would recommend, and correct me if you think differently, but the radicallyopen.net is like
Mm-hmm.
the main place to go for the like official trainings. Plus, right here at UCEBT.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. All
It
right.
looks like Kaylee is typing in the books, so I'll let you do that, Kaylee.
Sweet. Okay, so the last skill we're going to be teaching is kind of a 2-for-1, similar to what Carl did, where he introduced a little bit more of the psychoeducation that will come up earlier or in a previous skills lesson. The main skill that I'm going to be working on teaching is called self-inquiry. Um, but I'm also going to be teaching radical openness to enter in. And something to note is that the way Carl, Kaylee, and I are introducing these skills is really similar, if not almost identical, to the ways we introduce them in a skills class directly to overcontrolled clients. So you're really getting an experience of what it's like to be in their shoes and receive the information as they're receiving it. And part of that is that we will slowly work through the material, something that's shown throughout the manual and in the research is that because these clients are threat sensitive, shoving information down their throat as to what to do differently can create quite a threat response. So being able to help walk them through, like, why are we approaching it this way? What happens when you show up this way or your coping style looks this way? It really allows that we call it smuggling in ideas. We really allow their minds to work through it and give them some space to do that. So you'll see that in each of our skills teaching, and especially mine. So uh, the core deficit of overcontrol that self-inquiry and radical openness are really tackling is this lack of receptivity and openness. This is the core way that we work to open back up when our mind is threatened and really wants to close off. So I start this by introducing like the idea of perceptual biases, or exploring like how do we become closed? So these are questions I will ask the clients in the skills class, and I really want each of you to type into the chat what your responses are. So how do each of you respond when confronted with a different point of view about something important to you? So some options are maybe you lean in and actively listen. Maybe you initially have like a little bit more of a defensive response and you'll quickly like ask questions or share, oh, sorry, or share information to the contrary if it feels like it's a like it's confronting your beliefs. Carl, are there any that people have
Yeah, let me
shared?
get some come in now. We've got somebody said I pause.
Mm-hmm.
I worry my idea was wrong. Initially, rigidity and willfulness.
Yep.
Somebody responded somatic responses. My body feels a bit warmer and tighter.
Totally. Yes, absolutely. And so we can
Really
see
think about
this.
it, can be defensive, throw out a counter idea.
Yeah. So sometimes we have really adaptive responses to a differing point of view about something important to us. Like we're like, oh, interesting. Like, let me ask more, let me lean in. And sometimes we have like a less adaptive response, right? And we're kind of we push away. Sometimes we can feel go numb. A lot of the responses you guys gave are great. Sometimes we just want to change the topic and we want to get away from it. And so I would love for you guys to really think about what is your favorite strategy to avoid hearing a different perspective, to keep your beliefs in place. What do you do? What's your favorite one? For me, I love a debate. So I will just like keep throwing out reasons why I think that my style or what I'm thinking makes more sense.
That's my thing in close relationships. In non-close relationships, my favorite one is just to change the topic or slowly turn away and exit.
Mhm.
Some great ones in the chat.
Yeah.
Try to prove my view is right, grandiosity,
Mhm.
and one of my personal favorites, I agree with Hannah, go to people who I know will agree with me.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
put my opinions out there and then find a way to have to leave the situation so I don't have to hear their comeback.
Yeah, walk away. I love
Yep.
that. Gossip with your friends. Be like that. They don't even know what they're talking about. Yes. All
Sometimes for me, I'll just not share anything because I can't hear a different opinion if I don't share my own.
yeah, totally. Yes, keep it to yourself. Okay. So after we've had the clients kind of really mull over like what are the ways I respond, what are my favorite strategies to avoid, introduce more this idea of a confirmation bias. So we all create our own belief systems whether we like it or not, and we just naturally tend to pay attention to things that confirm our beliefs, and we tend to ignore or dismiss more often things that don't. Right. So this graphic here, like I'm going to focus on what I think, and like the facts are, whatever. I'm just going to pull in the ones that confirm my belief. And so I'd love, and I similarly ask the same question to my clients, like, what do you think, what type of confirmation biases do you think are the most common among over-controlled individuals? So I'd love for you guys to guess. What do you think? What are some beliefs that over-controlled individuals hold about themselves or the world that they tend to um, grip really tightly to? So maybe some of them I've heard are um like I don't really feel a lot. Emotions aren't really that important. Or like I don't really care what people think of me. Or the only way to get ahead is to make pretty big self-sacrifices.
In the chat we have coming through, I'm good enough. I have to work very I'm protecting myself.
Yeah.
Would
People are on
add
hmm
uh, perfection or achievement is what gives me worth.
Totally such a good one. Yeah. So just recognizing there are all these beliefs that are holding in place this coping strategy and confirming like this is the only way to engage in the world. This is the best way to engage in the world, or this is my only option. So then I'll introduce the idea that um, there's so much that we just like don't know about the world. And that really keeps us from learning new things, right? If we're only attending to information in our environment that confirms our belief, like we're just not learning a lot. And so whenever we believe we already know the answer, or we notice we're threatened by a differing point of view, it's important to recognize you've already made a decision, right? Your brain has made a decision about that incoming information. And so really, to learn anything new, we have to first acknowledge that we don't know everything, which is sometimes hard. And to learn anything new, we have to shift. We have to try out new ways of behaving. And so here's my, little graphic, like we're just gonna, sometimes some of our clients just want to sit on top of this hole or inside this hole that they dug themselves by not acknowledging that, like, there's so much that I don't know, right? I just want to hold on to some of these beliefs just naturally. So in true kind of practicing flexibility and trying new things without really knowing what we're doing, we're going to practice self-inquiry, even though you have no idea what it is yet for some of you. So what I'd like you to do is read through these list of myths of a closed mind. So this is an exercise I do in the skills class. I want you to really just write down for yourself on a piece of paper or typing on your Word doc, at least one myth here that you at least somewhat believe is true. And we're going to do some self-inquiry about that myth. So first we're going to select the myth. So perhaps it's going to be being open means others can use you, only idiots are open. Maybe if you have an opinion on how things should go, you're going to get hurt. Maybe it's doing something different means giving up my values, or doing what I always do just feels right. Um, Rules are to be followed, especially my own. Or if I try something new, it's just not going to help. I've tried everything there is to try. There's nothing new out there. Planning ahead is always imperative. Which of these myths do you notice your mind gets caught in? You believe is at least somewhat true. Okay. Now, hopefully you have at least one myth. We are going to practice some self-inquiry about your myth. So the goal is to read through these lists of questions. These are all self-inquiry questions, and try to find the question that makes you the most uncomfortable to answer. Maybe it creates the most tension, there's the most avoidance around it. And I want you to start with writing down that question and try your best to answer it. And we're going to do this for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to set a timer about 4 to 5 minutes, which is that's like typical length is about 5 for self-inquiry. And I want you to just write what comes up when you answer the question. With that being said, and I'm going to go over some of these points later and why I'm saying them, I want you to be aware of quick answers to the questions. Often that represents old ways of learning. And so kind of encourage your mind to stay on the question a little bit longer past your like initial quick response. I want you to, if you kind of notice you get to the end of a question, just pick another one to answer or come up with one on your own that maybe feels like it's continuing to keep you at what we call your edge, the place where you most want to avoid, the most kind of tension that's around this myth. So maybe that question is, what might I need to learn from this myth, which is a really core self-inquiry question. Maybe it's, what might this myth be telling me about myself and my life? Am I feeling tense right now? And if so, what might that mean? What is it I might need to learn? How open am I to thinking differently about this myth or changing the myth? How does holding on to this myth help me live more fully? How might changing this myth help me live more fully? What might my resistance to changing it be telling me? What does holding on to this myth tell me about myself? What do I fear might happen if I momentarily let go of it? So just notice the question that was like, oof, that would be uncomfortable to answer, and start there. And I'm going to set a timer and have us all practice. And truly, the best way to understand self-inquiry is through your own practice. It's kind of I feel somewhat like an abstract concept until you've done it. Okay, it's been 4 minutes, so just for time's sake, I'm gonna have us pause there. So that would be like if you started right when I finished talking, would be a little bit shorter than we would do at least 1 more minute for writing out the self-inquiry and just exploring. Um, so great job doing your first self-inquiry for some of you, or just practicing again for others. We really do make the clients like jump right in and they don't know what they're doing and that we're smuggling the idea. You just go for it, just try. You don't have to be perfect. We don't even know what perfect looks like for us. Um, so what is radical openness, right? So I introduced this idea of perceptual biases that our minds can be easily become closed off. So what does it mean to be radically open? And it really just means being open to new information or disconfirming feedback so we can learn, right? Open back up so we can see really what the world has to offer. And this really helps us learn to celebrate self-discovery instead of being so overwhelmed or threatened when our version of reality is challenged in some way. So we're like, let's figure this out. Let's understand what we don't know. It often involves trying out new ways of behaving that can help us cope more effectively, right? So for our perfectionists, like, let's try like taking a rest or sending an email with mistakes in it or signing off early at the end of a day. Let's just notice what happens, right? Let's like practice a little bit more openness. Um, and also what radical openness does is it really helps your relationships. It models humility and basically says like, I don't know everything. So let's see what the world has to offer. Let's see what my partner has to offer, my colleagues, my kids, whoever it is. And it involves purposeful self-inquiry and a willingness to acknowledge our fallibility with an intention to change if needed. So, if that's what radical openness is, what is self-inquiry? So, self-inquiry is our key to radically open living. It is basically the skill for what do we do to be more radically open. It means finding a good question in order to elicit our edge, and then allowing an answer, if there happens to be one, to be self-discovered by us. So it begins often by asking this core self-inquiry question. If you're ever worried about where to start with self-inquiry, start with this question. What is it that I might need to learn from this painful experience, right? From being cut off in traffic, from being told that I could do something better, from a new situation, my schedule being shifted last minute. What is it that I might need to learn from my discomfort here? And this question really prompts us to turn towards and be curious towards our discomfort. So for those of you who know other therapy models like acceptance and commitment therapy, this is a really core part of it and part that we practice in RO too, of let's notice where our discomfort is and let's turn towards it and practice curiosity. So it helps us develop this healthy habit of recognizing that our tension or our negative reaction to something may have more to say about us than it does about the world. That's probably pretty uncomfortable at first to acknowledge, right? But what it does is it helps us break down automatic avoidance, denial, or regulation, helps us be more open to the world. And we teach our clients to do this in the moment. So you can do it right in the moment when it's happening, all of a sudden be like, huh, what is it I need to learn from this? I can do it in my head, just to myself. I can do it out loud in a process called outing that we won't really be going over today. But just being like, oof, okay, I'm having some tension here. Like, I'm just gonna quickly like be like, what might I need to learn from this? We can also do it by journaling, which is usually how we introduce it, so that it feels like it's a private experience, which creates hopefully less threat for the individual, that you get to do it for you and you don't have to share it with us if you don't want to. So self-inquiry, some core key pieces to it. And I will say these at the beginning when I'm teaching self-inquiry to a client in skills class or individual. And I will also have to say these core things many, many more times. I was recently talking to Carl and Kaylee about this, that like there'll just be these magical moments during treatment where they're like, oh, that thing you said about self-inquiry, now it makes sense. And you're like, I've been saying that like 10 times, but it takes a while to really fully understand them. So, self-inquiry celebrates the pursuit of truth, not the attainment of truth. So, we are enjoying the process of being curious about what might there be to learn, or what might I be avoiding, and what new truth is there. But we really aren't like, find the new truths. We are just like, let's look for them. Self-inquiry challenges our perceptions of reality. So we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are, right? So we experience the world through our own lens. So if we're having a reaction to the world, that likely says more about us than the world, or just enough that like, might as well be curious with it. It actively turns towards the experiences we want to avoid and discount or are challenged by so we can learn. and it facilitates the creation of new meanings and new insights and new behaviors, which is really what we're trying to get our RO clients to have, is more flexibility, try new things. So this edge that I've mentioned, what in the heck is that? So our best self-inquiry question brings us face to face with our edge. We describe our edge as our personal unknown, sometimes our shameful secret about ourselves, sometimes our arrogance. And when we locate our edge, we're likely to discover our dark side, something that we prefer like not to admit about ourselves, or we can work really hard to keep a secret or hide from. And that's sometimes what can create that tension. The world is really bumping up against that. That being said, there's always flexibility, that our edge doesn't always have to be so heavy. Sometimes it's really like the little things in life that matter. Sometimes it's not really something we're really ashamed about. It's something we're just not aware of. We're like, oh, I didn't even realize that that was underneath that. So it looks like different things, but it's really, we kind of also talk about it as like, it's where your conscious meets your subconscious. You're like, I know up until this point, and then after that, I'm really not sure. And so we just practice curiosity and asking ourselves questions. What self-inquiry is not, so is just as important as understanding what it is. So it's to find a good question, not a good answer. It's not ruminating about a problem, because we're not looking to solve the problem or avoid the discomfort, right? We're turning towards the discomfort and we're practicing curiosity. It is not a way to regulate ourselves or distract or rationalize or soothe or problem solve or accept. And it does not mean that there's no truth in the world, right? That like everything is subjective and you always have to question everything. No, like there are some truths in the world. It also doesn't mean that we should never trust our intuition, right? It's not a means to get down on ourselves, though it can be like a really painful experience for our overcontrolled clients and ourselves, because we're really turning towards that tension. And sometimes we have to let go of really long-standing beliefs that we've had about the world that have made us feel safe. It's not a means of self-criticism. When I have clients that get caught in self-criticism, I let them know that that's not the essence of self-inquiry, that you're regulating, that you're not turning towards and opening up to the discomfort. And self-inquiry is not expecting the world to change or blaming others. It's actually really looking at our own perception. We focus on it because it really affects our relationships. It enhances them, it models humility, it helps us learn. So just thinking about this question of how many of you really want to spend time with someone who says that they know it all, right? They're just like, I know that, whatever, I don't need to learn anything new, right? Or who operate from a really closed-minded view. And just thinking about what might that tell us about the utility of self-inquiry. So these are questions that I'll ask and have our clients really like think about to help like smuggle in this idea, right? This is an important aspect of relationships. A couple things to deepen our understanding is that self-inquiry is able to question itself. So with each new insight that we get from self-inquiry, like I'm like, oh, I discovered this thing about myself, that this is underneath one of my coping mechanisms, that like that new insight is still potentially fallible, right? And maybe later on I'm going to be curious about that again. So always willing to question itself. It has the courage to admit our faults to others, how we've contributed to something without getting down on ourselves. It seeks self-discovery, but again, I mentioned before, it's suspicious of quick answers. Quick answers often reflect this old learning, right? This like, oh, this is like my always thought process to this. And so it tries to come up with an explanation or a solution to get us away from it. So we have to just be suspicious of that. It acknowledges to ourselves that we're at least on some level responsible for our perceptions in an order that avoids harsh self-blame or other blame, right? Like sometimes a couple at the beginning, a self-inquiry journaling from a client will just be like, I'm the worst, I'm to blame, I suck, or this wouldn't happen, right? That's all old learning, right? That's how your brain has been doing it. Let's stay in the discomfort a little bit longer and be like, what else might there be to learn from this situation or this pattern? It means purposely cultivating a sense of healthy self-doubt without falling apart, right? So can I turn towards myself and be curious without immediately falling apart, like I'm the worst, right? So I thought I might have time at the end to do another self-inquiry practice. This will be in the slides as like a great way to introduce it to clients or to send them home with a homework assignment of just kind of how to prompt to think about a time recently where they experienced some type of unwanted private experience that Kaylee kind of mentioned, some tension point, to write out or type out what that situation is, and while they're doing it, try to find their edge. I usually have them highlight it in their journal or underline it. That will help them recognize, like, ooh, that's where I want to focus most on. That's what makes me most uncomfortable about the situation I'm describing. And then once you found your edge, you can always start with the core question: what is it I might need to learn from that tension or that situation? Or what question might I need to ask myself in order to learn? And then I picked out some core self-inquiry questions on this next page that I've either had clients tell me that they find really helpful, I've found really helpful. It's just a good starting list to pick from to be curious with yourself. And then at the bottom, if you notice that you're resisting even engaging in self-inquiry, these are some self-inquiry questions to ask yourself to kind of move out of that. So that'll be something you guys will have to practice on your own. These are the references for our presentation. If anyone is curious about them, Carl, there is the skills manual here and the official manual. And this is our contact information. If you want to reach out to us, I believe Jennifer is going to send out our emails, or already has given our contact information. So if any of you guys have follow-up questions, you're welcome to email me or Carl or Kaylee or all of us. We're a tribe. We're happy to answer it all together. So thank you guys all for coming.
Done. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good.
So,
We're just chilling.
Bye.
bye.